Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered how people hold on to their faith when faced with totally new and even challenging experiences? Well, this new study dives deep into just that, looking at a very specific, very religious community experimenting with psychedelics. This paper is super fascinating because it explores how psychedelics, specifically a plant medicine called ayahuasca, are used and understood within the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi Jewish community. This is a group known for its strict adherence to tradition and its conservative way of life. It is a pretty understudied area when it comes to psychedelic research, which often focuses on Western secular settings. So, the big question here is, how does something like ayahuasca, with its intense altered states and often non-Western origins, fit into a community with such deeply rooted traditions and social norms? The researchers wanted to understand the whole experience for Haredi Jews. They asked things like, what do these ceremonies look like? Why do people participate? What are the actual experiences like? And how does it affect their religious life in the long run? They also looked at the tensions that arise and how people try to resolve them. So how did they do it? They talked to a group of 23 people who identified as Haredi and had used ayahuasca. These interviews happened in Israel and the US, and they also watched some ayahuasca ceremonies and looked at religious texts. They used a method called thematic analysis, which is basically about finding the common stories and patterns in what people say. They wanted to let the themes emerge directly from the participants' experiences, not impose their own ideas. Now for the juicy part, what did they find? They identified 6 main themes. First, the ceremonies themselves. These weren't just standard ayahuasca sessions. They were creatively adapted to fit Haredi culture, incorporating Jewish prayers, songs, and even rituals like lighting Hanukkah candles or blowing the shofar. It was a blend of the indigenous Amazonian traditions and Haredi Jewish practices. Some ceremonies leaned more towards Jewish elements, while others were more of a mix. Interestingly, most of these ceremonies were mixed gender, which is pretty unusual for Haredi settings where strict gender separation is common. They even had men and women on opposite sides of the room, but without a physical barrier, a mekitza. Sometimes they offered single-gender ceremonies for those who preferred it. What got these individuals to try ayahuasca in the first place? The biggest reason, and this is a key finding, was therapy. Most participants, about 60%, turned to ayahuasca for help with things like depression, trauma, or just general psychological distress. They often called it the medicine. Curiosity was also a big motivator for many. Hearing about transformative experiences from friends or family, surprisingly very few, only about 13%, started out for explicitly spiritual or religious reasons, even though their experiences ended up being highly spiritual. This is where things get really interesting. All participants described experiences that were deeply infused with Jewish content. They had visions related to the ancient Jewish temple, encounters with biblical figures and famous rabbis, and deeply spiritual experiences involving the soul or neshama, and even divine manifestations in Jewish terms like Hashem, which is God. Some even experienced themes of Jewish prophecy and redemption. It was at times like, as one participant put it, Judaism became more real than real. Beyond these mystical visions, some participants also reported experiences of religious tension. This could involve questioning God or Jewish law, feeling they were doing something forbidden like idolatry, or engaging in behaviors that went against Haredi norms, like women temporarily removing head coverings. A subtle but interesting difference emerged. While Jewish spiritual experiences were common for both groups, Israeli participants described them with more depth and detail. They also reported more experiences of religious tension. The researchers suggest this might be because religious identity in Israel is often more publicly and politically charged, leading to a more direct engagement with it during these experiences. What about the long-term impact? All participants reported broader positive effects like increased well-being, but the most striking findings related to their religious lives. Most expressed a deeper, more personal connection to Judaism, a strengthening of their religious belief, and a more meaningful relationship with God. They found new understandings of Jewish texts and concepts. Some even shifted toward a more experiential and internally motivated way of practicing their faith. However, the changes in religious behavior weren't all in the same direction. About half of the participants reported increased religious observance, like praying more or studying more Torah. But the other half described the loosening or softening of some religious boundaries, a greater flexibility in their practices, and a reduced reliance on rabbinic authority. Some even felt this flexibility reflected pre-existing desires, with ayahuasca acting as a catalyst. This shows that for some, ayahuasca can lead to a more selective and understanding-based approach to religious practice, rather than just following tradition blindly. Now, with all these powerful experiences, there were bound to be tensions, and the paper outlines 4 main areas. First, the sheer foreignness of ayahuasca and its lack of precedent in Jewish tradition. Participants felt it was something outside their normal world. Second, the clash between Amazonian cosmology, which can be animistic, and the strict monotheism of Judaism leading to concerns about idolatry. This is a really big deal in Jewish law. Third, the mixed gender participation in ceremonies clashed with Haredi social norms of strict gender segregation. And fourth, a really crucial one, was the tension between experiential authority versus textual authority. In the Haredi world, religious truth comes from texts as interpreted by rabbis. But ayahuasca experiences can feel like direct sources of truth and guidance, which can challenge that traditional structure of authority. So how did they navigate these tensions? They came up with some clever strategies. One was medicalization. By framing ayahuasca as a form of medicine, it could be seen as more acceptable within religious rules, as there are precedents in Judaism for rules bending for medical necessity. Another huge strategy was koshering ayahuasca. This isn't just about food, but about making something religiously permissible or acceptable in a broader sense. They essentially koshered the setting, and the experience. This meant adapting the spiritual and ritual elements to align with Jewish frameworks, removing or reinterpreting non-Jewish language and practices. They also managed gender dynamics, sometimes through single-gender ceremonies or by restricting certain aspects, like women singing loudly. The intentions and mindset of the participants, the set, were also koshered. By framing the purpose in Jewish terms, like healing, and aligning their intentions with Jewish theology. Some even looked into the indigenous traditions to ensure they could be seen as compatible with Judaism, helping to ease idolatry concerns. Even the experience itself was addressed. Rabbis might guide participants on how to interpret visions, cautioning them against treating future-oriented visions as authoritative divination, or advising them to focus their supplications on God, rather than ayahuasca entities to avoid idolatry. Finally, the researchers speculate that the ceremonies functioned as a bounded liminal space. Think of it as a temporary, exceptional space outside of normal daily life, where certain norms could be loosened without being completely abandoned. This liminal flexibility allowed for unique experiences and a sense of opening, particularly for women, while still staying within a recognized religious framework. So, what does this all mean? This study is a groundbreaking look at how psychedelics interact with a deeply conservative religious community. It shows that these substances aren't just injected into a culture but are actively translated and adapted. The Haredi community, despite its conservatism, shows a capacity for integrating new experiences, albeit through careful negotiation and reinterpretation. The motivations were primarily therapeutic, which aligns with broader trends, but the integration into their religious lives is what makes this study so unique. The findings highlight how culture and religious frameworks deeply shape the psychedelic experience, making it distinctly Jewish. The tensions that arose, like the conflict between experiential versus textual authority, are significant and shed light on how these communities grapple with new forms of knowledge and experience. The strategies of medicalization and koshering are particularly insightful, demonstrating the adaptability of religious traditions. Of course, this study has its limitations. It is a qualitative study with a relatively small sample size, and the Haredi community itself is diverse, so experiences could vary greatly between different groups within it. Also, the sensitive nature of the topic might mean participants selectively shared or framed their experiences. But overall, this is a really important piece of research. It makes us think about the contextual flexibility of psychedelics and how they can diffuse into even the most unexpected corners of society. It opens up exciting new avenues for research at the intersection of psychedelics, Jewish culture, and religious life. Imagine what else we might learn if we look at how these powerful substances interact with other unique cultural and religious groups around the world. What do you think about these findings? Does it surprise you that people in such a conservative community are exploring psychedelics? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this breakdown helpful, give us a like and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more deep dives into the amazing world of science and psychology. See you next time!